You were an honor roll student at Queens College. How does a college education help you to become a good comedian?
Well, it does require a lot of discipline. I mean, jokes are not easy to write. And comedic thinking, if it's good, is very disciplined. I mean, there's got to be a very strong logic. That's what tricks people into the joke, into believing what you're saying is really of value and has some, a real point to it. And, of course, it just ends in some silly turn. But you have to have the ability to think clearly.
And do you feel that being a student that college provided you with that ability?
Yeah, I think I think in school that's what you do. School is not learning, it's exercise. You don't remember anything that you learned, but the act of trying to learn is mental exercise, and that exercise builds some sort of muscle that you can use.
So there was a discipline that you established, or a routine that you got into the habit of doing as a college student that you feel carried over into your work as a professional.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to me was that I finished college, even though I didn't really accomplish much besides that, but I did finish it. And that set up a pattern in my life of finishing things and seeing it through. And in comedy and stand-up, there you encounter resistance, and it's good to have that pattern in your life to keep going.
Were there any college courses that you took that you feel helped you toward becoming a comedian?
I remember in high school I took geometry, and we had to do these theorems, where you had to prove why one side of a thing with a series of theorems. And that is very much like comedy. Proving something that is absolutely trivial, but with rigorous logic. That's what a joke is, I think.
Mm-hmm. How about in college?
No. Well, I think if I had known going into college that I was going to become a comedian, I would have studied philosophy, English, and history.
But earlier, if you recall, I asked you, when do you feel you were able to pinpoint that you wanted to become a professional
Well,
comedian?
wanting to be and making the decision to be is two different things.
So while you were in college, you hadn't quite made the decision?
No, I was wanting it, and I was still scared, still petrified.
What was it like at the beginning? How did you begin to learn the craft of making people laugh?
Well, the thing about learning comedy is you can't train for it off stage. To actually perform stand-up, you must get on stage and do it. So your first show, you're introduced as a comedian. You have never done this before, and they introduce you as a comedian. It's as if you wanted to become a surgeon, and they said, well, here's the knife, start cutting, and keep cutting until the guy feels better. So you learn by doing, and it was night after night. In my first 4 years in New York, just walking around doing the clubs every night, I'm sure more than once I went 18 months without missing a night.
After you've done a TV appearance and you watch yourself on the screen, what are some of the things that you look for to help improve yourself?
I had a rerun on the Letterman the other night that I watched, and the pacing was completely off. I was completely out of rhythm with the audience. And
what does that mean, then?
Well, it's like a conversation. The laughs and the comedy have to have a nice balance to it. And if the comedian pushes his act too much into the laughs, it hurts them. So you have to let the laughs kind of breathe, and then the comedy breathes. And every performer has his own organic rhythm, and you just have to know it and be true to it. But
and you didn't know at the time you were doing it that the rhythm was off.
Yeah, I wasn't paying attention to the audience. To me, really good comedy is a dialogue. It's not a monologue. Their laughs are as important as what I'm saying, because that's what laughs contain thought. You know, they have different shapes and sizes and sounds and colors, and each one says something. So that's their part, and then I say my part. But it has to have a nice rhythm to it. That's how you develop what we call a role.
So besides recognizing that, the fact that you felt your pacing was off, is there anything else that you look for specifically to watch? Or do you...
Oh, lots of little detailed things, gestures that are repeated too much, or, oh, God, a zillion things. You
Well,
know.
let's take a very important thing like gestures that are repeated too much. Some performers are not aware that they're constantly doing this, and they don't realize that it becomes a distracting thing, and that it in essence hurts the line or the laughter, etc. Is that because they're not aware of a thing specifically like gestures?
Sure.
What do you think it is that makes you say, I noticed that I was doing one gesture too much?
Yeah, well, you know, when you talk, you don't think about what you're doing, you just talk. But when you're a comedian, you have to analyze every aspect of how you communicate and think about how you can improve it. It's a weird internal exploration, but that's what becoming a stand-up comedian is. It's an exploration into the self. You must explore and define yourself. And to the extent that you succeed at that is, I think, the extent to which you succeed as a comedian. It's not competition. It's not the audience. You have to figure out who you are and express it well. And that's hard to do that, you know. But that's what a comedian has to do. So each person really has their own project. Everyone's going off in a different direction, or should be, you know. Comedians don't really need anyone to tell them what to do. They have to explore themselves.
In Comedy USA, you were quoted as saying, I've done it almost solely on technique. It's not like you just look at me and laugh. If I didn't have good technique, there'd be nothing funny about me at all. What are some of the techniques that you're referring to?
Well, I know my stuff really well, and I develop it as, you know, I spend a lot of time developing it. I never just think of a joke and do it, and that's the end of it. I do it, and then I try and find another way to do it, and then a way that I could expand on it, and I explore each notion as far as I can. And I do that off stage and on stage, but I put a lot of thought into it, you know? So, I mean, it's not just being a funny guy.
What I was trying to get from you was the actual techniques. Is there something, for example, would you take a notion, a funny thought, and put words to it, and then do it, and then practice it, and then find that you could do that line and get a laugh if you left out some words?
Right.
So that would be a technique, huh?
Yeah, the editing. I mean, I will spend an hour trying to get an 8-word line down to 5, if I can do it, you know, because that's part of what makes a joke, is the economy of the expression.
In my interview with Jack Benny, he said, a lot of people think that I have great timing. He said, I really believe that I'm a great editor. He said, I think through the years I was able to edit my material. And I thought that was fascinating coming from him. When you're involved in comedy, you recognize how important one word or 2 words can be.
Yeah.
So you're developing a line and you're working on it. So that would be one area that you would work on, let's say, to polish the line. That's one technique.
Yeah.
What are some of the other things?
Well, it's just using yourself physically on stage, you know, thinking about how could I express this physically as well as verbally. And the first few years I did comedy, it was just from my nose to my chin. That was the whole act, you know. And then I started to find ways of explaining things, you know,
body language.
With body language. So I explored that for, you know, I still am. And you just stumble over it from the years and the sets of just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sets.
Is there something about the security of having done the lines over and over and knowing that the laugh is there that allows you to relax and experiment with a different delivery or a different body?
Yeah, sure. Confidence, you cannot have too much confidence in comedy. The more you have, the more you can use. You can use it all because you're always, trying to reach out to people, and the more you believe in a thought, the funnier it seems to get.
What is meant by the setup of a joke?
Well, the setup kind of defines the end of the cliff that you're going to get the audience to jump from. And the punchline is the cliff on the other side that they have to reach. Now, the distance between those two determines if they laugh. If it's too far, they don't make the other side, they fall into the ravine. If it's too close, there was no thrill, there's no titillation, there's no laugh. So the setup has to be the proper distance from the punchline to make that mechanism that causes a laugh work.
Now, let's say you got an idea for something funny. How do you decide how much of a setup is required?
Well, that's just instinct, I guess, or you just decide. I mean, you guess.
Is that a question of writing the funny thought, doing it, finding it that you get the laugh, but that if you cut down the
Right.
setup, you can still get the laugh?
Yes.
And once again, trial and error?
Yeah, it's endless trial and error, and that's why the best material is, I mean, if I've been doing a joke 2-3 months, to me it's not done. I've got to be doing it 6 months or 8 months before I feel that I've finished it. That's how much trial and error is necessary to really refine it. Every time I say a joke, I'm talking about a piece that can involve 4 or 5 laughs in
A
it.
hunk of material.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But I usually take a subject a little further than just one joke.
In my interview with George Burns, he said that one of the advantages in the early days of vaudeville was that as a comedian, if you had 10 minutes, you could go for 5 years all around the country and do the same 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But you had a chance to polish and improve that time,
Yeah.
so that if you were good and you got to the palace, or you got to the big time, you had it down pretty well.
Yeah, I sometimes think about that. I can't imagine what that would be like, just doing 10 minutes for 20 years. But they did.
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah. You enjoy studying Eastern philosophy, and you were quoted in People magazine as saying, Zen is just looking at something from a different perspective, and that's a lot of what comedy is. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Well, let's see. Think of a little Zen parable for you. Now, there's this, these stories of in Zen of like the master and the student, and the student comes in and says, I've studied with every master everywhere, and everyone has told me that you are the best, and I've come to you finally to really learn Zen, what I need to know. And so the master says, okay, and he says, but first we'll have some tea. So he brings out the teacups, and he starts pouring the tea, and he's pouring the student's tea, and the cup starts overflowing, and the master just keeps pouring it. And the student says, what are you doing? How can you possibly put more tea in a cup that's already full? He says, that's exactly the problem with your brain. A lot of Zen, it's kind of funny that way, But it's just taking a little bit of a look at something in a funny way, and it's illuminating,
Carrying it a step further.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody talks about the importance of comic timing. How would you define timing? You talked earlier about watching yourself on the David Letterman show and the
Yeah.
pacing between you and the audience.
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with timing?
Yes, there's that timing, and then there's this joke, the timing of the specific joke, which we talked about before, the two cliffs that you got to get an audience to leap. And it just has to be the right size leap. But most of the timing is very rhythmic. I mean, I think you find a lot of ex-drummer comedians, and a lot of comedians that think they could be drummers. You know, I always thought I could. It's a certain rhythmic, music. It's music, and you have to know the music. I mean, once you get an audience going, you just ride it. It's like surfing, you know. It just carries you along. Once you establish the rhythm of the audience, and you've got their timing and they've got your timing, that's it. Then you just ride that out to the end of the show.
Do you know the word a topper?
Yeah.
You know the word? Years ago, the comedians, the good comedians used to do the joke and then top it, and then top it, and then top it, and the roll. I mean, once you got the roll going, you would.
Yeah.
Do you try to do the same
Sure,
thing?
yeah.
Do you look for a topper
Yeah.
on that particular joke?
Sure.
That is a technique that's worthwhile and still used.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Try and put one after another and get them as close together as possible. You try and get an audience almost gasping for breath, you know. You really do try and hurt them. People come out sometimes and they say, boy, my face really hurts from laughing. You know, and you go, well, I'd really like to, make you pee in your pants and split your sides, whatever they say.